Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have an incredible and fantastic episode for you today. And we're going to have an episode analyzing the Super Bowl, of course, today. I have to defend this on the grounds. I mean, there's a lot of news out there that we could talk about. I mean, we've got the stuff going on with the Doge kids, things going on with the White House, Trump, Elon, a lot of that stuff we got. But we talk about that every week. We've been talking about that for every week for since the election. So it's good to have something different to talk about. And the Super Bowl only happens once a year, and the Super Bowl is the biggest cultural event in America. It does highlight where our culture is, where our society is, and what it says about the country itself. So it's important to talk about it. And this episode, we're not going to really talk about the game that much. I mean, just to give my few thoughts, it was not a good game to watch. Eagles clearly dominated the entire game. Chiefs played like shit. I was rooting for the Chiefs just simply because they're the more conservative coded team. I mean, there is an annoying factor about them. They're too good. Taylor Swift, even a lot of the things about Mahomes. You didn't really want to root for them. I was rooting for a bunch of every other team I root for lost. So, I was rooting originally for the Lions. They haven't been in the Super Bowl they've never been to a Super Bowl, actually. They've got a very white team. They've got a cool coach. They were really good this year. They were the best team during the regular season. They lost. Then you were rooting for the Bills because you're like, Josh Allen's awesome. We like Josh Allen. He was having some great posting in high school. And then they lost to the Chiefs thanks to the referees. And I think a lot of the ways the referees try to overcompensate. But the referees didn't matter. I mean, the Eagles clearly outplayed it. But it was not a good game to watch. Most lopsided Super Bowl I've watched since, I think it was most lopsided Super Bowl since 2014. Most of the time, the Super Bowl is a really good game, very close game. It is usually the two best teams in the NFL, but this one, not one of those cases. You'd have to go back to the 80s and 90s when it was generally this lopsided. For whatever reason, just a little bit of football. 80s and 90s, there was a lot of lopsided Super Bowls. Generally an NFC team beating the shit out of an AFC team. For whatever reason, I haven't really looked into it. I'm sure there are explanations, but the NFC was far superior to the AFC for well over a decade. I don't think the AFC, there was 16 or 17 years where the AFC didn't win a Super Bowl. An AFC team didn't win the Super Bowl. And generally they're getting blown out in the Super Bowl. I don't particularly know the reasons why. I'm sure there are explanations, but you'd have to go back then. But that's enough about the game. Not a very good game. We're going to be talking about everything else around the game with the opening to the game, the advertisements they were doing, or the specials they were doing. There weren't really advertisements, that there were productions that they had before, the commercials, and of course the halftime show. And we did get a question about the Super Bowl and being woke. I think at the point I want to talk about our answer is whether this is a post-woke Super Bowl. I think it's important to discuss that and say we need to answer this question. So I do have one from K-Max about the Super Bowl, and he said he was wanting this for the mailbag, but it would have been it's a time-sensitive question. We've got to do it for today. So he said he asked me, it's like, Scott, the Super Bowl was basically not super political, but the one exception was the halftime show with Kendrick Lamar and the fact that 0 white people and 100% blacks people performed with him. Scott, your view of that? Then the one commercial with Snoop Dogg and Tom Brady entitled "No Reason to Hate" ad. My view of that ad. And then he also highlighted the ad with which everyone is talking about, is the NFL flag football, or girls flag football ad, which is showing girls are better at football than men, which is obviously not true because not a single female player was on any of these teams or any of the pro teams, period. And there's not a single female player even on the college teams. I mean, some teams will have a kicker who's female, and then she generally sucks. I think there was a few years ago where Vanderbilt had a female kicker, and she was horrible. Generally college kickers aren't very good, but she was really bad. But they just did it because, to get attention. They've done this for a while. I remember, I think, when I was growing up as a kid, I think Duke had a female kicker. But Duke was, I think Duke is still very bad at football, but they were really bad at football. They were really good at basketball, but they were just like, might as well just have a female kicker to get some attention. Vanderbilt's generally not that good, but they're back to being good, or back to being decent rather, which it goes off and on whether they're good or not. But in any case, going on the woke aspects of this, but I'll go and answer that question in a moment. But the first thing I want to start off with is what the pre-Super Bowl production. So first thing you notice is that they have Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Black National Anthem. This is mandatory at all marquee games. So they do this at opening the first game of the season, which generally takes place on a Thursday. I always forget if it starts Labor Day or the week after Labor Day, but it starts early September, generally a Thursday. I think they've done it at the Chiefs Stadium for the past few years. I think it's whoever won the Super Bowl last year. They could do it at a home game for them. Don't quote me on this, but that seems like what has been the case. They always have it at the marquee games. I forget if they had them at the championship games. I didn't see them at the championship games, but I'm not sure. But they do have it at the Super Bowl. And you watch this, and it's full black, obviously. But it's always, whenever they sing it, most of the time the crowd doesn't know what to do. And it's also very clear that blacks don't really know the lyrics to the song. Like, it's not truly the Black National Anthem unless they really deeply know it. And it's more of this, like, put-on performance that is like a hangover from peak woke. But they don't really want to get rid of it because blacks now are like, well, this would be anti-black to get rid of it. So then they keep putting on this awkward performance that no one really understands or gets into. And whenever they did it at the Chiefs game, because Chiefs, one reason to root for the Chiefs is they have a fairly white conservative fan base. And they would always pan to the crowd, and the crowd just like kind of looked at each other. It was like extremely awkward. They're like, we don't know what this is. We know it's racist to look bad, to like be making laughing at it or something. So they're just like kind of all awkwardly staring around, not knowing what to do. And it's every time they play this. I don't think they pan to the crowd during it. During the performance, but it is one of those weird things. And then, being in New Orleans, they then highlighted all the black culture. It's like our local culture that we have, and it's like drumline stuff and the local music they have, and it's all extremely black. Apparently there's no white culture associated with New Orleans. It's all their culture is black, which that's generally how most cities envision their culture. I think like Nashville is like one of the few places that's like, oh, our culture is country, and it's obviously white, even though at the Country Music Awards and stuff, whenever they're highlighting country music's history, they always like to highlight about how, oh, blacks were involved in this too. But it's, white. That's like one of the few cities that'll do that. I mean, even if they did like a Super Bowl in Denver, Colorado, I'm sure they would try to find something black about it to highlight as our local culture. So they always do that with that. Has a very extremely black cultural format, very magical. So you would say this for a lot of normal conservatives, they would have a problem with Lift Every Voice and Sing, but they probably wouldn't have that big of a problem with the drum line and stuff. They'd be like, oh, this is exotic. Oh, look at how they dance. They would be like that. So I don't think that would have been that offensive. We'll get to the halftime show in a moment. But then they had this ad, or Fox put on this ad, who was hosting the Super Bowl or airing the Super Bowl, had an ad with Brad Pitt, and it's like about America. And it's like a patriotic ad about what America's about. And it's centered around the huddle, where everyone is equal in the huddle, and we work together as a team to make our country better or to win football games. And football is like the natural or is the exemplar of American culture, is the message of this ad. And it's a pretty interesting ad of what it sees as what is America is, because what it primarily highlights is the Wright brothers, Iwo Jima, the March on Washington, MLK's March on Washington, and then landing on the moon, the moon mission. So those are what is Apollo 11. Those are the highlights of America. Now they start to incorporate later on in like brief snippets. They have the Tuskegee Airmen, suffragettes, some cowboys. They have Indians popping up in random places. They have signing the Declaration of Independence. It's all this stuff, and it's built up into this ad where we all come together in a huddle, work together as a team, as equals to in this crazy, confusing experiment we call America. And it is that ad. And now most conservatives would have absolutely loved this ad. I think right wingers would have been the only ones disconcerted at it, mainly for the March on Washington stuff. Probably not even really the random Indians. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. It was like, you're just like there. It's like, okay, that's of course obligatory. And then the women's rights stuff. I guess that would be some of the things that they would not, be that fond of. There was no BLM stuff or really overt. I don't remember seeing any pride stuff. It's just that we have a lot of diversity and we're together. But it's primarily like we love the troops, we love the flag, and a part of that patriotic history and mythology is celebrating Martin Luther King, the Tuskegee Airmen, and Indians dancing. So, most conservatives are going to like that. Most conservatives like the Tuskegee Airmen and Martin Luther King. That's why they're always competing for Martin Luther King to say he's a conservative. It's also, as I always like to emphasize, Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln are the two most popular American historical figures, which is why both sides try to claim Lincoln and King as either a liberal or a conservative. So that's something that it's part of the mythology. So I was trying to think of thoughts of it, but I just think that ad is an expression of how middle America or mainstream America views this country and is what we are at this point. It is post-woke in a way because there's no obvious things in it where the average conservative would be upset about. There is some things like we march for social progress or something, but then they're like, well, March for Washington was a conservative thing, and so they're not going to be that upset about it. At the same time, it is very diverse. It is multicultural, but not obviously so, because everyone is assimilating into watching football, and everyone is assimilating into seeing their history being found in the signing of the Declaration of Independence, in the Wright brothers, in landing a rocket on the moon, getting man on the moon. And so it is that part of that history and heritage, and it's also including the Tuskegee Airmen and others, and also Iwo Jima and other aspects. So it is like very much an expression of what patriotism would be to mainstream America. And so I think it's important to watch that ad to understand where most of the country is. And I think most of the country really liked the ad. There was something weird about it. I think it's more Brad Pitt's performance. It was like the way he was saying things. It was definitely not one of his best performances, I'll say that. But it was more dealing with Brad Pitt than anything else they were showing. But the average, I'm sure Fox News this morning is loving that thing. It's like, this was patriotism. This is a lot better than that weird rapper Kendrick Lamar they had at halftime. That's what they would really like and say, this is what America is. And generally it did feel like something. When I was watching with friends, they were like, well, that's weird that, Fox, production would do this, that it does have a tie-in with Fox News. But this is exactly what the type of patriotic, if they're like, do a 5-minute spot on America and patriotism and tie it to football, Fox Nation would put this out. And it's appealing to a large segment of Americans, but I think the average dissident right-wing person would be not that thrilled with it. So there's something there to that. I'm probably not going to dwell on it that much because further thoughts on it would be a column or an IQ supplement, but I would just point that out, that it's reflects the patriotism of the vast majority of Americans. Now we'll go to the halftime show. We'll go to the advertisements at the end, but the halftime show is something important, and it isn't sort of post woke, but not in the Super Bowl being post woke. It's more America's reaction towards it, moving beyond rap. It felt very out of tune with the rest of the country. If they wanted to have a show that was more in line with America, because what they've always tried to do at the Super Bowl is find artists that are appealing cross generations, where someone in their 50s and someone in their 20s can appreciate the music and it's something catchy and that they all know. For the last few years, due to Jay-Z running and his company running the Super Bowl, it's been very black. But they generally went with more popular black artists that even some Gen Xers would appreciate, and even maybe a few boomers. I think the first year that they did rap, I think that was 3-4 years ago. They generally went with like 90s rappers and Eminem and Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and stuff that like, most boomers would not like it. My dad would absolutely hate it, and my mom would. But there's enough Americans who would have appreciated that, and most Americans knew those songs. And then the next year they did Rihanna. Most Americans would know those songs and not have that big of a problem with it. And then last year they had Usher, and most Americans same deal. Probably even less of a problem with it than they would have had with Rihanna. This year they went with Kendrick Lamar, which even I showed my age. I'm not quite familiar with any Kendrick Lamar songs. This is how old I felt. Like I really felt like my most boomer moment. Like there's like this stuff about Magic and all that, which we'll get into. I think it's more to show is like how few people were getting into this. Like you could feel when the crowd is getting into the halftime show. Like last year they were getting really amped up for Usher, and he did stuff on roller skates. Like people were excited and getting into it. This year, the crowd was not getting into it because there's like these songs, even people I know, unfortunately, I do have friends who have not taken the full Greer Head Pledge, and they do like Kendrick Lamar. And even they were complaining about it. It's like he didn't play any of his big songs. Nobody really knew what he's doing. There's not any choruses to sing along. He's just like kind of mumbling the whole time, and everyone over the age of 35, I'm still under 35, but everyone over the age of 35 is not understanding anything he says, even though he himself is over 35. They're like, this is for the young people. Kendrick Lamar is 37, okay? It's like, and he's primary audience, I think, is mostly millennials. But I'm not even familiar with any of his songs. So, and it's certainly nothing he played there, and it wasn't anything to get the crowd hyped into. It's like, oh, that's his big hit. No one was going along with it. They had the bizarre Samuel L. Jackson thing, like Uncle Sam, and doing this, I don't know, minstrel act. I don't know what the hell that was about. Most people thought that was cringe. Some people liked it because it was probably the only thing they understood. But it was weird and all that. So it was definitely not appealing to, it was only appealing to a niche segment of the population with this. And you have to remember is that there's a lot of older people who watch this. And this isn't even just not appealing to people who are over 65. This is not appealing to anyone who's over 40. And even people under 40 didn't really think it was that cool. So it's like, who are you appealing to here? So just bad choice about it. It also like unleashed the inner racist on me. We obviously disavow racism on here and would never support such a thing. But watching it, I had this tweeting out the guy in the Burger King hat, and you felt like that guy was rushing out in you watching this thing. It's like it was so confusing to me, and it's like almost it was a really like provocative approach of like black culture. Is like shoving it in your face. And they tried to have like, oh, it's red, white, and blue. And there were some boomers who were trying to say, it was in red, white, and blue. There was no wokeness here. There was no pride flags or BLM. And it's like, yeah, they're all in do-rags and stuff and doing like this weird dancing and stuff, and you can't understand a word this guy is saying. It's like it's a complete affront to your cultural sensibilities here, and it's like rubbing a completely different culture in your face and saying this is what you're going to enjoy for 15 minutes at the Super Bowl halftime show. And so it's like, you felt it's like an affront. It's like that they're trying to rub this in your face, and it's like annoying. And you really felt like that when you were watching it. And it was, and nobody understood a word. So it's like, you definitely felt old. I know there's going to be some audience members who are like, oh, I'm a huge Kendrick Lamar fan. I understood every word. But even the ones the people I know who are friends with and they watched it, they hated it. So, I don't think it was a good choice. But I think the way the country reacted towards it is the country didn't like it. All the social media said it was sucked. And even the people who are trying to defend it, there's like people like going to conservatives like, well, it's patriotic. Or there's some idiot who has said, is like, conservatives don't understand hip hop culture. And it's like, dude, we don't want to understand it. Okay. We think it sucks. Also, this is primarily older people. Like, they don't like it in general. They're Gen Xers and boomers who, where it was the norm to hate rap music. I think for millennials and Zoomers, like rap music has generally been the default music genre for us. Well, that's even changing. It really felt behind the times on cultural moment. This felt like something from 2021, not something from 2025. It felt like something that would have been more appropriate post Black Lives Matter or post George Floyd than post Trump's election. And when I said it's rejected the ballot box, it was. I mean, the kind of overt black worship and obsession with black culture was not celebrated at the ballot box. We rejected a black woman at the ballot box, and we in a lot of the country came together to say we'd prefer something else. And generally, it would have been more appropriate for the moment to have Morgan Wallen perform than it would be to have, or even Creed, than to have this. And more people would have appreciated and enjoyed the show than this. So I think the Super Bowl itself was trying to make itself post-woke. I mean, there is the fact they replaced in racism with choose love. But then Roger Goodell says, well, we still support diversity. But even then, like, there's left-wing critics who say they don't do enough of diversity hiring. I mean, they still keeping the Rooney Rule that requires teams to interview black coaches for jobs, other things, and they're still saying we're supporting diversity efforts, but then they're just not putting BLM propaganda and their end zones, and now it's just the ambiguous, meaningless choose love instead of end racism in the end zone. And so itself, it was sort of trying to be post-woke, but still behind the times in realizing that rap and overt black culture that is unappealing to older whites is not in season right now. It's not in with the times. Like, they would much prefer a country artist to bring on. Now, if like Morgan Wallen brought on Kendrick Lamar to perform a song together, that would, everyone, unfortunately, everyone in America would love that. But most of the time, for most of the country, they didn't want a straight Kendrick Lamar rap. And so it was like more jumping the shark than hitting their peak. It's like saying, the reign of rap is diminishing. This wasn't cool. No one thought it was cool. Everyone thought it was lame. Even the attempts to say, oh, you guys don't understand it. It's like, no one understood it. No one like got vibed with it or anything. They didn't understand it. They didn't like it. They much would have preferred a country act to perform at the Super Bowl. And it had been much more appealing to a broader swath of Americans than this. It was too much of an affront. And really, I think the public's reaction just shows how they're more post-woke than the Super Bowl. So that is the elements there. Now, also they did have a terrible national anthem. They were trying to New Orleans it, which means they tried to magicify this. They tried to make it the most like black Super Bowl ever. And it really felt like, what year is it? It felt like they were not trying to do the overt woke expressions that they would have had in 2021, where they would have had Black Power Fist, they would have had a Black Lives Matter flag somewhere, and they would have definitely had like end racism and and also the names of black victims of policing and stuff everywhere, which those weren't there, but it was like really overtly black culture in a way that the rest of the country has moved away from wanting to worship. Like, Afrolatry is not really at its peak right now, but they were trying to do this, and they had this terrible national anthem of a black guy playing piano and doing the national anthem in his own way, and it really didn't seem like the crowd enjoyed it. But it was like trying to be New Orleans, and I don't think it fell flat. But that's there. It was their own attempt to move beyond divisive social issues and show a different country. Now, the advertisements were its own story, which The Snoop Dogg Tom Brady ad, like to end racism, is just so ham-fisted and corny. Like, I'm surprised they even ran it because it just felt like an SNL skit of like, here's how we're going to end racism. We're gonna get Snoop Dogg and Tom Brady give dumb reasons for hating each other. It's like, I hate you for being from a different neighborhood. I hate the way you talk, and like these are really dumb reasons. It's like, and then they're like, it shows how bad it is. We have to make an ad about this. I mean, nobody in America was convinced by this. It was lame. They always put these like PSA type announcements in there. Of course, it was financed by a group mainly focused on ending anti-Semitism or stopping anti-Semitism more than anything else, which is curious. But that also didn't land, and also it didn't seem like most people paid attention towards it. But the other ad, the ad that gained the most attention was the NFL's own ad, which was supposed to be a marquee ad because it's like, wait till after this halftime. This could be the first advertisement after the halftime. So it was like got a prime position. You're supposed to pay attention to it. They're hyping it up before, and it has like a stereotypical high school from the 80s, which right-wing Twitter would love. They're like, oh, there's us. It's the jocks, and we're about to stuff the nerds in. So most of the shut-ins and anons and incels are finding their old Letterman jackets to go and stuff some nerds in. But then the nerds turn out to have a great female athlete, and she schools all the male athletes, and she's beating them up, and then they have to get their best male athlete, who's the Brad, to challenge her, and Brad easily gets defeated by her, and it's all celebrating girls' sports. And conservatives were most up in arms. If it's the halftime show, they had to be a little bit more diplomatic, because to hate on it too much would have been racist. But then they chose this because this is like, oh, there's not a race angle to this. It's the girls' sports angle. But there was a lot of ads about this, because there's like a lot of these ads about like beauty product. It's like, you feel comfortable in your own skin, and it's like young women get drop out of sports at age 14. We need to stop that, and female self-esteem. And then there's like breast cancer ads, and it's like watching these ads, you would have thought that women are the only consumer base that they have to worry about. Like, there's not a male consumer base, and also there's no epidemic of young men like dropping out or anything. That the biggest problem in our society is low self-esteem among young women. And we have to raise it up by pretending that female flag football players are far better than male professional football players, which is like the NFL's message in the ad. So it was like very woke, and people were like, this was rejected at the ballot box. In a way, yes, but in a way, not. Because just guess what Trump just signed last week? He signed an order banning men and women's sports. And there was a big ad that conservatives loved about how we got to protect women's sports. And even conservatives have just rallied around defending Title IX and women's sports from the problem of trans athletes and stuff. And then conservatives are complaining about it. It's like, look, if the Brad had been, the Barbara, and it's a dude, they'd be like, this is the most right-wing ad ever. We love this. This is great. We're standing up for biological women against inferior male athletes. They would have loved this ad. Just with a few little changes, this could have been the most like right-wing ad ever. It could have been just like that ad that J.K. Rowling and all these other people were soy-jacking over about like defending women's sports. And then like Trump's action last week to defend women's sports. So, and to uphold Title IX. So actually the whole country is about this. It's not as out of tune as you would think. Look at the popularity of Caitlin Clark. Now we have conservatives actually watching women's basketball on their own volition. Now, I've been one of those people who have talked about Caitlin Clark because of the racial angles with it. I mean, the fact is she is a white player, a good-looking white player who gets beaten up by black players for racist reasons, for anti-white reasons. Even though she then checked her white privilege, well, it's whatever. They still hate her for being white. So there's that angle, but I'm not going to go out of my way to actually watch a WNBA game. But now conservatives are all watching WNBA games to root on for Caitlin Clark. And so they want to complain about this ad. They're at the same time, they've spent years celebrating women's sports. Some ways it is a way as a wedge issue to go after the elevation of trans. I understand that. And if the cost of limiting trans influence is to pretend you like women's sports, sure. But one of the after effects of this or results of this is you get idiotic ads like this. And you get the further feminization of society and the further focus on all women's issues. And we, as a society, we feel that women's self-esteem is the most important matter. And we have to create a society that is at pains to always elevate women's self-esteem, no matter the cost. And if you have these ads, you think that women just aren't empowered enough, that apparently they don't have enough opportunities and they're just feeling bad. And so we have all these ads designed for it. But in fact, it's showing how much power women wield in our society, as we have an increasingly feminized society. And even though wokeness is receding, I had a tweet about this. Simping is increasing because simping is a natural effect of a feminized society. Is that whether it's girl dads like, yes, princess, we'll do everything for you, or, guys just trying to pretend they like Taylor Swift or anything, even though there is more of a backlash against Taylor Swift. Everything is about pretending or following the whims of women in hopes of pleasing them and elevating their self-esteem. And maybe the daughter gives the hug back to the dad, or you're able to go on a date with this girl, whatever it is. Women have unprecedented levels of power in our society influence. And you could look at that with even Super Bowl commercials seem primarily directed to women rather than men, which, still even the Super Bowl, I was like wondering what are the gender breakdown for the Super Bowl. I'd still say it's still mostly men, but they know that women are better consumers than men are. They feel that they have more purchasing power now and that every product has to be geared towards women in order to have as much, profit as possible. And so we have this as a society, is that everything is centered around women. And the issue is that comes with it is that it's young men who are falling behind, not young women. Young women are reaching levels of status and wealth and influence that has never been seen before. They're the ones who, over 60% of college graduates are women. They're also starting to make more money in certain metropolitan areas than men. They are also the ones that our entire culture is built around, with music and movies and other things and TV shows, all primarily directed towards women and not as directed towards men. And that's just how our society is structured right now. It is structured around simping. And conservatives are as guilty of this as they are with liberals. And I was getting into this with the Panda Express gate, a few weeks ago about that matter. Is that all these conservatives who are telling like young men to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps and go to work at some shitty job, they are not giving the same advice to women. With women, it's they're the little princess who deserves to go to college, deserves to have the man of the dreams, deserves to live out their passions and dreams. And with men, it's go fuck yourself. We hate you. You deserve a shit job. You should be excised from society. And even with these ads, because young men are struggling far more than young women. Young women are, it's like the country is their playground. they have, messages designed to improve their self-esteem no matter what they do. It's like, you're beautiful even if you're fat. They tell them that. Well, with men, it's like you deserve to be an incel. You don't deserve any woman. You everything is your fault. You're to blame for everything. You suck. You only deserve a job at Chipotle. And that's generally what society is telling young men now. And then they worry. It's like, why are young men having no motivation? Why are they sitting at home and just playing video games? Why are they tuning out? Why are they getting down dark paths and Discord? Why are they getting into drug abuse? Why are they committing suicide at higher rates? Why is all this happening? And then they're like, well, we're not going to have any advertisements about it, because guess what? Cindy did not get a date from the Chad that she wanted to because she's fat. So we're going to have a whole industrial advertisement complex to tell her she's beautiful and hot and deserves the date from the man of her dreams. And so that is what's happening to our society. And if you look at the messages delivered to young women, it's that young women can juke out like pro athletes in flag football. They are smarter, stronger, better than men in all respects. All products are geared towards their interests and sensibilities. They shouldn't change a damn thing about themselves because they're beautiful and great, whatever, however they look and however fat they are. And this is it. Well, for young men, it's go fuck yourself. You're the biggest problem in society. You guys are getting the racism and hate, and you should be left behind. And and you look at the trajectories going on with men and women. So it's just a effect of feminized society. And that is like an important factor in our culture, that even with wokeness receding, it's not receding on the gender stuff. Well, the male women gender stuff, the two genders, as long as we agree that there are two genders, that stuff isn't receding. The type of gender war stuff is not going away, and even conservatives are just as guilty, encouraging the feminization of society and a female-centered society we're increasingly having. But it is what it is. You know, they do wield tremendous power in our society. They are, gaining. They are becoming an interest block. I mean, even though they failed to deliver the victory that Kamala hoped for in the last election, that factor is not receding in the same way that Afrolatry and overt black cultural expression is. Now, they could have had another rapper who people were more familiar with. I'm sure if they had gotten Kendrick Lamar's arch nemesis, Drake, I don't think that people would have really liked it much, but I think people would have enjoyed it more. Or even if they got Lil Wayne or something, one of the more pop rappers, I'm sure that it would have been, old people wouldn't have liked it, but majority of Americans would have been fine with it, unfortunately. But, they went with Kendrick Lamar. So that's like the thing that's going on with woke is still cultural expressions have not moved with the public, as can be seen by the Super Bowl, but it's still a good barometer of where the public is. And the thing that people are most mad about is the Super Bowl ad, but that may have been defeated at the ballot box, but conservatives don't want it defeated, are just as guilty of it as liberals. And that the increasing feminization of our society is something that's not receding, while wokeness is, and the overt expressions of it, like in the black worship that they try to do in some of these Super Bowl programs, also the trans stuff, and even the anti-Americanism, anti-patriotism, that stuff is moving aside. But the female empowerment is increasing, and simping is increasing, and just how our society is working and trends and developments that are going on. So that's my thoughts on a post-woke Super Bowl. It's not quite what we'd want. But you can see woke receding, and it's just that the Super Bowl hasn't yet sufficiently gotten with the times of the rest of the public. So that's my thoughts on that. And maybe even the NFL ad went a little bit too far. If they had had the chick competing against a trans athlete, every conservative would have loved it. Obviously, the NFL was probably not going to do that, but there was a way they could have made this ad about celebrating women's sports, and every conservative would have been soy jacking over it. But the fact that they kind of made it an in your face, like, woke ad, it incensed conservatives. So that is it on the Super Bowl. We're going to be moving along to other questions. I still haven't given my Cotton Elite pitch, but as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cotton Elite option and Highly Respected. And for less than $16 a month, you can get all this power. And if you don't want to sign up for that, you can still sign up for the regular subscription at Highly Respected to get access to the mailbag and IQ supplements that occur every week. So we are going to go with Ken. We're going to go with Ken. Ken's got some questions today. He said, "Hey, Scott, could you explain on the next podcast how exactly it is that illegal immigrants take advantage of government assistance and include your thoughts on how big of an issue it is?" And he has a graph from Center for Immigration Studies on it. Well, here's what happens with welfare is that a lot of states and municipalities offer them government assistance even if they don't have legal status. So they're able to obtain this. There's about a half dozen states, a little bit more, that offer this. So they're able to get that through city and state. Also, some of them commit, social security fraud and other things, and they're able to obtain some of this stuff. So government assistance. And a lot of the things that they incur is healthcare. Because none of them have healthcare. So they go to the emergency room, they get whatever problem fixed up, and then they don't pay. It's you the taxpayer pays that. That's like a huge problem with the healthcare system, is that the only people actually pay is white middle class people, white working class people. No one else, and also the well off too. The blacks and Hispanics don't pay, and certainly most illegal immigrants don't pay. So we're set for the cost for this. So they do get free health care just by going to the hospital. And sometimes there's means testing with it where they can get on states and cities help out with that as well. So that's how they're able to obtain it. And it is a huge problem because it's a drain on our system. It's a major drain on our system. And also immigrants are more likely to be on welfare than white Americans. So it is, it's a major problem because a lot of them shouldn't even be here. And then they're leeching off the system. So obviously it is a big problem that you have here. So his second question, could you give your estimate on how many Anons are actually Jack Chads in real life? I've been seeing more physique posting recently, as well as lots of talks about the Jock Nerd Alliance. And if you take right-wing Twitter at its word, it seems like all of our guys are sub 10% body fat Casanovas. I'm not trying to counter-signal Anons being one myself, but it seems hard to believe that the type of person who gets into right-wing internet culture is also the type of guy who played quarterback in high school and slept with the prom queen. You're exactly right on this. Jacked Chads, real online, I'd probably say 5%. Now, guys who are fit, there's a difference between like Jack Chads or former jocks. Like a lot of guys who get into this are like nerds and tech guys who then take steroids in their 20s and 30s and then they get jacked, which is impressive. I'm not doubting it, but that still doesn't mean you were the star quarterback in high school. And so a lot of these guys, they're like, it's more of a midlife crisis thing where they take on a high school identity that was not their high school identity, but then they take it on and they demand that people assume it is. I think Dave Reboy is probably the best example of this. Is like Dave Reboy is clearly a fucking nerd and probably was bullied in high school. Then he gets jacked thanks to steroid use, or we'll have to allegedly due to steroid use, or allegedly to supplements. And then he gets, now he's like, I'm a jock, I'm an athlete. And he probably wasn't. And he clearly, by a lot of his resentment and insecurities, he was not one of that. So, even the jack guys, I don't think most guys are like fat losers living in their basement. I think it's a lot of guys are just normal or whatever, or average. And I would say that's probably the majority of guys, but the guys who are actually like jacked, maybe a quarter, but it depends on what online sphere you're saying. I mean, a lot of guys are into working out and a lot of guys are fit. So I don't know, maybe I would be one of those people jacked. I mean, I work out 4 times a week, so that's more than the average person. But you have to remember is the average person actually doesn't work out, especially when they get married and stuff. It's like when people get into family life, even though it's like everyone's like wife guy radical, blah blah blah. It's actually I'm deadlifting 455 or something, and while taking the kids between softball practice because they're girl dads. It's a lot of guys don't have time for that. And also a lot of guys, it's very tough for them to get into that schedule. And it even happens with like former athletes. A lot of guys I went to high school with and were in fraternities with, they ballooned. They were jocks and then they just got fat and they just don't care about it anymore because they're not playing sports anymore. So I'll just say a quarter. Maybe a third, but it's like I'm gonna say fit, physically fit, as if they took off their shirt, women would, and people would be like, "Hey, that guy is jacked." I would say that I would probably give it a quarter or a third. So that's definitely not majority. And actual jocks who were like varsity athletes in high school, probably under 10%. But it depends on what you mean by the right wing sphere. I mean, guys are casually into this stuff. There is a lot of like jock fraternity types, but the guys who are really online and to really into like extremely online, it's it's not a hobby you get into. You know, it's a hobby you get into when you had a lot of free time in your hands, which a lot of the like varsity athletes didn't have that, and also they would think it's weird and gay to get into that. At least in my time. Now, if I don't think it's that different for Zoomers, but they might be casually into right wing content. So, but under 10%, as I would say. I don't know. I have an article coming out this week about the jock nerd dialectic. I was thinking about it was going to be for tomorrow, but I think I'm going to have something else for tomorrow. But it's going to be out this week. I think you guys will enjoy it. And so his third question, I'll just answer this now. He said it could be for the mailbag. What's your thoughts on a possible Stephen A. Smith presidential run? Will he run? Could he win against J.D. Vance? Could someone like him or Jon Stewart be the guy who ushers in American Chavismo? No. No, he wouldn't be the American Chavism. It would be like we're like anti-woke Democrats who are running. Stephen A. Smith wouldn't be the guy. And Jon Stewart's time is long past. Stephen A. Smith has a lot of popularity and charisma, but also people clown on Stephen A. Smith. Like, they always make fun of him, and he's like scrawny guy. They also complain he's not an athlete, even though he talks about sports. Like, he's probably the wrong guy to ever run for office. And they would both have to run for Democrats. And what likely they would run as is like Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign, not her 2016 campaign. They'd be like returning to that type of liberalism as their thing, which I don't think it's going to work. There's other politicians who are going to run for that who are more serious candidates. I don't think Stephen A. Smith would be the guy for that. It's a funny hypothetical, but no, I don't see him. The sure thing I can say about both Jon Stewart and Stephen A. Smith is that they would not be the guy running on American Chavism. They would be running on the guy of like old school Clintonian liberalism. That's what they would be running on. It'd be running on like a moderate platform, but in a more masculine, charismatic way than some of the other people would be running on that. It'd be like Amy Klobuchar as a likable guy, or as a more funny, charismatic guy. That'd be my thoughts on what it would be like. So that's the questions from Ken. We're going to save Michals for last. He's always our guy. We used to, end on New England refugee, but I like ending on Michals. We'll go with Floris. Floris asks, will the masses become less politicized? And, hold on. Some of the things Michals complains about, like some of the people, like I run over some of the questions, but sometimes people put the wrong words. But he means, with the masses becoming less politicized, will this weaken the ICP or other similar low IQ groups or behaviors? You mentioned in your recent article on Bread and Circuses that sports betting, the NFL, and other assorted entertainment has caused normies to drop out of politics and become much less whipped up than in the past. Will a consequence of this be that insane clown party antics and cat turd slop decrease as their audience trades them out for the NFL? Absolutely not. That is going to be only stronger moving forward. I think we discount how big it is because maybe we don't see it as often. Like, I don't follow Cat Turd, so I don't see Cat Turd posts, but Cat Turd gets insane levels of engagement. We are having high levels of slopulism going on in this country. So, no, that type of stuff is still going to be there. It's going to be stronger than ever before. It's not... With the masses becoming depoliticized, the people are still politicized, boomers, and really mostly, this is really Gen Xers more than boomers who are getting into this stuff. They're going to be still be consuming political content, and what they want is cat turd. As long as they're voting right and believe the right things, that's fine. But there is a problem with aesthetics and cultural sensibilities, which we really can't solve. A lot of people like complain. It's like, why are we just promoting slop? And I remember I had a question about this there was like some really tacky conservative calendar that was there. And some people are complaining, it's like, and they're comparing it to the New York Magazine article on inauguration parties, which all these guys were soy jacking over and being really like, this is us. And then they're like, the liberals betray us is better than how conservatives betray us. But the difference is like our audience, not specifically us or distant right people, prefers that slop element. They like that stuff. They like the Peanut the Squirrel dancing along with like Trump, Elon Musk, and RFK Jr. to YMCA. Okay, they love that stuff, man. They think that's awesome. That's the type of memes they like. So that's just a problem with our audience. I mean, even if you go to a Trump rally, like these guys, I mean, I think it's funny. I'm not condemning it. It's whatever. It's harmless. But you know what? These guys really like that, type of trashy style on their own. It's not like they want like some really avant-garde aesthetics or something. Our audience is not the crowd to really enjoy Robert Eggers movies, even though now there's some people turning against it. But, they're going to be like, this is weird as shit. So, there's a difference between the base and some of the extremely online people and what they prefer in their aesthetics. So we'll move on to Stealth Bomber. Stealth Bomber asks, this past week you declared you are against all drugs. Greer heads need to know whether this includes Zen or not. It does not include Zen. Alcohol, tobacco, and if you consider caffeine a drug, are perfectly fine. I don't use tobacco. I'm not into tobacco, but it is not Greer head disapproved. So you can use Zen. You can drink. We are not full-on temperance supporters here. We are not full-on prohibitionists. So, yes, Zen is perfectly fine. I don't use Zen, but it's fine if you do so. We'll finish off with K-Max. We got a lot of questions today, so it's fine. He has one for the mailbag, so we'll save that. He said it's about USAID. USAID and its effects. Do we overstate its importance? I always wondered how woke media stayed in business despite being so popular and anti-white. Was USAID part of the explanation? What will the revelations do to many of our legacy media institutions? No, they do not depend on USAID. There was a lot of like misinformation about this because I think they went to a database where it had nonprofits listing their normal tax releases, which forms. There's forms. If you have a nonprofit and you pay people over a certain amount, you list their compensation. What people thought these tax forms was USAID support for it. So all these people are like, wow, USAID is paying a lot of National Review writers 6 figures. They're in control of National Review. No, National Review isn't getting anything from USAID. Chris Rufo isn't getting anything from USAID. It's just like people can't look at a database. Really, the only media outlet that seems dependent on, it's not USAID, it's government paying for it, is Politico. Which Politico, they have a service called Politico Pro, which they gratuitously charge for it, which they shouldn't. And every government agency and every congressional office subscribes to it to keep track of bills. Now, you can argue that government agencies shouldn't pay that high amount to support Politico. I think that's fine. House offices and Senate offices probably need it, but there should be more competition and they shouldn't charge as much. And they're charging that much because they know that the government will pay for it. So, what's better deal is like, hey, you should be charging us a lot less if you want to keep these subscriptions. But that's it. It's not USAID providing for it. USAID is providing for a lot of foreign left-wing media and a lot of foreign things abroad that are bad, but everyone then determined that they're funding CNN, which is not true. They were funding BBC and a lot of other left-wing outlets in other countries. They're not doing it here. So it's more that social media misinformation. It is, I do, it might sound liberal, but there is a lot of, people do need social media literacy and not fall for just like fake news, because it's mostly like boomers and others who are like, and they'll see like some clearly AI generated video of like a space laser causing the wildfires, and they'll all believe it. And even some of our side will fall for just total fake news, as like what happened with USAID. USAID is bad, and people were revealing the bad stuff, but then it got, wiped away to believing that they're funding CNN and New York Times and Washington Post, which they're not quite doing so. So that is it. The revelations won't do anything to legacy media institutions, but legacy media institutions are getting hard hit simply by declining subscriptions and fewer people follow news, which is part of the depoliticized moment, which is generally good for us, good for the right. Second question from KMax. Often on our side, when we think of the civil rights in the 1960s, was this more like a second constitution? The deep state is where all the wokeness comes from. Lyndon Johnson's deep state, and thus dismantling it, is the best we can do to win the culture war. Some on our side think it comes from the private sector and are super rich funding it. Your view, Scott, on which is the bigger cause of wokeness? Well, Hanania had the thing that is primarily government pushing it, and I'm more of that agreement. I think the one thing Hanania mentioned is the ideological justification for it, or why we decided to do it, which Hanania dismissed and just simply said, we need to look at laws and legislation, which he might not now believe in that, because depending on what will piss off right-wingers, he'll be different. I don't think it's private. It's definitely not the private sector pushing this. It's government and government agencies, and also things that they're funding, like some of these nonprofits and NGOs that they do have a relationship with, which, even though I don't think it's like media, they are funding a lot of these groups that are pushing for illegal immigration and other things. So there is that. No, it's primarily a law and government setting these rules, and then if you didn't have the laws and governments mandating these rules to businesses would follow a different path. Some businesses follow along because they think it's rewarding the public, but now they are ditching the DEI stuff because they feel it alienates the public too much. They adopted the diversity stuff and the post Floyd moment, but now a lot of companies are moving away from it because they feel that it alienates the public. And if they don't have the government setting rules saying that they're going to be sued for not following these policies, then that's that. But it is like a second constitution, which was the point of Chris Caldwell's book, Age of Entitlement, and also what is part of Richard Hanania's Origins of Woke. But I think it's primarily comes from the government and laws that were put in place in the 60s and 70s, which now Trump and his administration are going after, which is very good, which will free up. But there are some things like social attitudes have changed a lot since the 60s and 70s. So we'll see what happens. A lot of businesses are still favoring minority hires over white hires, or hiring white men for various reasons. I mean, HR is still very much in control of hiring. Dismantling the HR bureaucracy would also be important. So maybe the government can look into that. Trump administration can look into that. So cause of wokeness are allowing it to affect your daily life. It's mostly the government, but it is also cultural changes that have happened that have made it more apparent. But if the laws are there and they're saying you have to hire these certain amount of people and you have to follow these dictates, that's why private sector is going to follow along. And if they don't have that there, they're going to go a different path. So that is the answers for... That's it for KMax. Now we'll go to New England Refugee. He's got a few questions. He says, I encourage everyone to listen to your Malcolm X IQ supplement. This is where I learned about Yaqub and the Nation of Islam mythology. According to the Nation of Islam, Yaqub was an evil scientist that invented white people in a lab and used them to dispossess Africans. They say we don't have souls and are pretty much irredeemable. What are your thoughts on Yaqub? I think it's a really funny meme. It shows how stupid the Nation of Islam is, that they would believe this. That's a short and sweet answer to that. I don't really think that deeply about Yaqub, except that it's really funny that they actually believe this. He's got a bunch of quick questions. He's like, if you're in a combat arms branch in the Army, which would you choose? Infantry, artillery, armor, or aviation? I don't oppose walking. I like walking. I had a lot of family in the infantry, so I'd be infantry. Not much of an engineer, not much of a math brain, but with a family in the Army, generally I would probably, if I had to be in a combat branch, it would be infantry. I don't know if I'd have the mindset for the other ones, but that's the most difficult branch. It's like the most selective branch. So for officers, I mean, as long as you're a physically fit young man, it'll be like, you're like, welcome to the infantry, as long as you don't wash out. But that is his question. And his third question, what have you heard about on the reconciliation bill? I hear from Mark Halperin that the Senate wants to press on big, but the But the Freedom Caucus doesn't like it because there aren't many cuts. Will Trump have to crack some Freedom Caucus heads to fund the mass deportations we want? Absolutely no. From what I'm hearing from people on the Hill and elsewhere, is that they're worried that the Freedom Caucus or Thomas Massie is going to get in the way. And also, likely when they're going to try to push the reconciliation bill in the spring, or probably even later this month, they are going to have only a House majority of one. Because once Elise Stefanik is confirmed, she abandons her seat, and so they're only going to have a majority vote of one. So if Thomas Massie or one other person doesn't like the bill and they want to make a statement, that's going to end the reconciliation. So the whole thing is going to be about Freedom Caucus. It's primarily going to be Freedom Caucus people. I don't think the moderates are going to have that much problem. Don Bacon, I think he's still in the House. I actually need to check if he's still in the House. Yep, Don Bacon did not retire. He's still in the House. He is the most libtarded Republican there. I think he would go along with the reconciliation bill. I mean, if he's having a problem with it, then there are real problems. Because Freedom Caucus and Massie and all those guys are going to have the most problems with it. And they're going to demand cuts. And they're going to further alienate themselves from Republicans and conservatives. Freedom Caucus used to be like a very powerful force within House Republicans, and they were growing. But everyone hates them. And if they oppose this towards Trump, and a lot of them were DeSantis supporters that didn't like Trump, they're going to have problems going forward. So, yeah, I don't think Massie's in Freedom Caucus. They keep their membership rolls secret. I know that MTG they don't allow in, but outside of that, they try to keep it secret. But they keep losing members. But yeah, it's mostly likely to be Freedom Caucus guys causing the most problems, not moderates. I think just increased funding for Border Patrol and ICE is not even going to be offensive for a lot of moderate Republicans. There's probably going to be there's going to be a number of Democrats who are in competitive districts who might vote for it. But they're doing the reconciliation bill so they can overcome a filibuster, so Democrats can't filibuster it. But the main problem is going to be whether they can get the House Freedom Caucus in line. Trump's been good so far about getting members from revolting. You know, we'll see how his Senate confirmation picks go. If he gets all of them through, then it's a huge win for him. And also there was an attempted revolt against Mike Johnson, and then he squelched it, which didn't happen at all when he was not president. So maybe this House Freedom Caucus is going to lose their nerve if Trump's calling them and threatening to primary them, that they'll go along and vote for it. But the one person that would probably be the less moved by pressure would be Massie. And if I'm not mistaken, he was still the one no vote against, our remaining no vote against Johnson for Speaker. And he may just want to make a statement and decide to derail the whole thing. So that's something to keep a watch out for. But it's going to be, those are going to be the primary problem for getting a reconciliation bill, which we need that reconciliation bill to increase deportations. So moving along, we've got a question from Jay. He asks, any truth to the Marco story or a story like it? And he has a tweet from Reddit where they're talking about, or it's actually another tweet. It's a guy quote tweeting or screen capping another tweet talking about Marco. And the guy says, a lot of Marco's about to go full Luigi. Mangione, count on it. Read all 4 panels and replies. And the guy it's a guy, John A. Conrad the fifth. I don't know who this guy is. He says, I don't like reporting secondhand info, so take this with a grain of salt. I repeat, take this story of rich liberal panic with a grain of salt. A liberal friend of mine who has a very liberal friend, let's call him Marco. Everyone loves him. He's rich, always relaxed, has a ton of friends, never gets stressed. One of those guys who somehow never works but lives like a prince. I described him to Grok to get his image, and it's fairly close, except Marco has a touch of artistic art European flair. To continue, we all assumed Marco was independently wealthy. Turns out he wasn't. Now Marco is in full meltdown mode. I mean, terrified, panicking like his life is over. This guy, who has always been the picture of joy, is freaking out so badly, his friends are worried he'll have a heart attack. Why? Well, probably financial problems. Maybe he got made money in crypto and it all went away. Who knows? Are they going to go full Luigi? No. I think most of these guys would just unfortunately commit suicide. I don't think they're going to go full Luigi. The people who are going to go full Luigi are the ones who are not like this. Luigi Mangione is a very much an outlier. Those guys who are going to try to do assassinations or mass shootings are losers who have nothing else, who really have nothing to lose. That's primarily who's going to be committing this violence. It's not going to be guys like Marcos. Luigi is an exception, which is why he generates so much takes and discourse, is because no one would expect this guy to do that. But there is a point where guys who have had everything go right in their lives and have had everything given to them, when they meet a hurdle in adult life, they have a full breakdown. And they don't quite go full Luigi, but they have a Luigi-like moment where their life goes haywire. They get into drugs. They just lose out because they've never had to face opposition and hurdles and obstacles in their life, and they just melt down when faced with it. So I don't think we're going to have... the guy might be making up a story like this, but I think there are types like this where they have some problem in their life and they don't know how to handle it, and then they go in meltdown mode. So that is my answer to Jay. Let's see who's next. I think we got a couple from Dollar Bill. Yeah, we'll go with Dollar Bill now, and I think we'll end on Mishaus. And if I didn't get to you, we'll get to you on the mailbag, so just remind me. So he says this with 3 questions. Do Stacey Abrams or Beto O'Rourke have a shot at winning the 2028 primary? Absolutely not. They are old news. This is like asking if Ben Sass is going to win the 2028 Republican primary. These guys, they are has-beens. Their time has passed. There's other people now. They are not. If they run, everyone's going to make fun of them. They're not going to raise money. They're over. They've lost everything they've ran for. They're done in politics. So that is my answer on that. Then he has a question. Kanye West recently resurfaced on Twitter and wasted no time calling himself a Nazi and praising Hitler. In the past, he has spoken on how people on the fringes of whiteness like Armenians, Hispanics, and Persians are drawn to right-wing or neo-Nazi ideology for the shock value. Is there a minority of blacks who do this as well, or is this just an idiosyncratic case of Kanye's mental illness? I think it's just an idiosyncratic case of Kanye. I know there's going to be people you got to call him Ye. I prefer calling him Kanye. I'm sorry to those people who are like, I'm damn naming him, but we're going to call him Kanye. Yeah, he clearly does have mental problems, but it was like really funny. It's like performance art, you know. He's like talking about Hitler, Nazis, and then he's just posting hardcore pornography, which don't approve of any of this, but it is like funny. It is like crazy content that you have like the biggest, rapper just like casually endorse Hitler on Twitter, and you're just like, what's going on? It's like so absurd that you just have to sit back and have some popcorn. Don't watch the porn he's posting, but just kind of laugh at he just like did this, and then all his fans who are just like so excited for Kanye, they're like, oh no, he's posting porn, I'm having to block him. It's like, it's part of the package. So yeah, I don't the minority of blacks who get into it, because it's like that school shooter from Antioch, which is a more important thing. I think it is guys who feel different from the rest of blacks. Like that kid was probably a nerdy black. I mean, that kid was wearing Burzum shirts. Kids in Antioch blacks were not wearing Burzum shirts when I was growing up there. And that's like they've been pushing blacks out into Hermitage and Antioch and Nashville. And it's really funny. Well, not funny, but it is interesting that Antioch would be a place to have school shootings, but it'd be like gang violence or like, guy, you stepped on my shoe, I'm shooting you. It is absurd that they are now even having like the weird kid school shooter events that are happening in Antioch. But I think that's kids more thing. I think that's just like maybe a smarter, nerdier kid at his school, and he's surrounded by blacks and Hispanics, and he just got extremely online. And it's just like, if you're extremely online, you're going to be interacting with this stuff. And I think a lot of these guys are just outsiders already, and they have more time to spend online, and this is what draws them towards it. It's somewhat shock value, and they also are different from standard middle American white culture, which is going to love that Brad Pitt Super Bowl ad, and they're going to be like, I don't really get this. And so they get into it by being extremely online. Kanye, I don't know why he got into this, but it's just a part of the package for him. So I thought it was really amusing. I didn't take it seriously, but or anything, but it's just kind of one of those absurd content moments that you have with Kanye. Three, I have recently seen some disturbing TikTok videos revealing that there is now something called British Latinos. And there's one video where a 5 foot tall mestizo wearing a backpack got onto a London bus without paying the fare, all while jabbering in Spanish nonstop. A Twitter commenter speculated in response to the video that there is a global cultural brown belt encompassing all of Latin America, North Africa, the Middle East, and India, and the people there broadly behave the same way in spite of the linguistic, religious, and racial differences of these regions. I think there is something to this idea. Picture a short, swarthy man with who is loud, obnoxious, wears way too much cologne and many gold chains. Is he Arab, Latino, Turkish, Iranian? He could plausibly be any of these ethnicities. What do you think? I think Hispanics are actually different from the rest of the Brown Belt in how they act and operate. But the rest of them, North Africa, to South Asia, even maybe some of the Southeast Asians a little bit, are all acting similar ways. I mean, Hispanics are just a little bit different in that. Now, they may operate in the same way. Yeah, they'll talk loudly on the phone. They still haven't discovered headphones. It's apparently a white invention that we've kept to ourselves. The other groups haven't discovered headphones yet, but they operate on that and they talk in their language. I think they do get kind of all mixed together when they're in America, because there's not as much of a strong Muslim identity among the immigrant groups as there is. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't strong Muslim, but it operates in a different way than it does in Europe, where Islam is like the rally flag to be an opponent to the mainstream European culture that you're around. While here, it's only like a very small number of Muslims. So they just kind of all get into this brown mass that's neither black nor white. And the recent immigrants all act in the similar ways. Even though I will say this, like for Indians, I pointed this out in my article about Indian assimilation, is that when I lived in a area that looked like the United Nations, Indians were the only ones who talked English to their kids. All the other groups talked whatever their native tongue. Even the Eastern Europeans talked, Russian or Ukrainian to their kids. So that is that. There is something that there is a global brown belt, but I think Hispanics do operate a little bit different. They can look the same as the other groups, so it becomes different, but they are a bit different. Some ways better, some ways worse. But in America, they all become one mass. And probably in Europe, it's because there's so few Hispanics, they all just become part of this brown mass there. But the one difference between Hispanics is that in other brown mass in the UK and elsewhere in Europe is that they wouldn't be Muslim. So that would set them apart a little bit. So now we're going to finish off with Mischhaus. Mischhaus asks, what is your average weekly use of the internet website reddit.com? I actually never go on Reddit, so 0%. Then he asks, why did America remagify in 2020 and 2012 or become, I guess, more, well, I didn't explain this, but I guess he becomes more into like Afrolatry and went down Black Lives Matter. Well, there's like a black cultural cachet began rising. I think it's also one thing is that white millennials, their rap replaced rock as the generic music for young people. So, and that created a appreciation for the blacks, that a lot of cultural appreciation for them that Gen Xers and Boomers didn't have. And even the type of music, I mean, Boomers and Gen Xers did listen to black. I mean, most Boomers you'll meet, they love Motown, but it was like music that whites could enjoy. It was not supposed to be like in your face, like black culture, like in the way that like the Kendrick Lamar performance was. It's like stuff that like, oh, that's like when blacks knew melody, that'd be like that stuff. But millennials were into this stuff. It's also the development of the internet, and the left got ahead of the right on this, and they were promoting more social justice causes. Trayvon Martin happened in 2012, so that's a very important moment, and that was where it showed the power of social media to elevate cases that would have never been known years prior. Now it's the number one news story in America. And also, Barack Obama won a second term. We got our black president for a second term, and apparently everyone in America likes him. So that was a part of that. And also, there was this feeling on the left that they are not achieving that post-racial America promised, and that America's still racist, and they're not having enough wealth distributed to them by white America. So then it kept elevating, and also the internet, it kept encouraging it. And also some of the letdowns from Obama not being radical enough, that they began pushing more in an Afro-latry direction. So I would say Trayvon Martin, Barack Obama winning a second term. And then the second term is really wokeness took off. And I think it's those two key moments of Trayvon Martin showing how the left could weaponize social media, and black activists weaponize social media to make them care about cases they shouldn't care about. And then Barack Obama winning a second term elevated that black culture is the dominant strain of American culture, and that everyone, like, rap music is the American music genre. And then that continued up until the 2020s, when country music then displaced rap, and media had a harder time making people care about police shootings, and Trump won the second time. So, or maybe a third time, depending on who you ask. So I would say that that is my answer to that. If the two events you want to look towards in 2012, Trayvon Martin, Barack Obama second term, winning a second term. So that is it for Highly Respected today. We're going to have more great content this week. It's going to be on a normal schedule, so no need to fear about things being out of order. So we are going to have lots of great content for you this week that you should be on the lookout for. So until next time, stay respected.